Blood and red wine have one thing in common. They both stain if you don't wash them out immediately. Working at Osteria di Savoia, Audrey Bennett only ever had to deal with the wine. That was until Lorenzo Moretti walked through the brass-handled doors. He was the ghost of New York's underworld, a man whose whispered name commanded entire empires. Audrey was just a waitress trying to make rent, supposed to pour the Chianti, keep her head down, and survive the dinner rush. But when his notoriously ruthless mother began berating the staff in rapid-fire Sicilian, Audrey made the most dangerous mistake of her life. She answered her back, perfectly. The air inside Osteria di Savoia was usually thick with the rich scents of roasting garlic, black truffles, and aged parmesan. It was an upscale, old-money establishment nestled in the heart of Manhattan, the kind of place where reservations were booked months in advance, and the chandeliers cost more than Audrey's college tuition. At 24, Audrey's life was a relentless cycle of double shifts and tired feet, all to keep up with the crushing medical bills left behind by her late grandmother, Beatrice. Beatrice was an immigrant from Palermo, a woman made of steel and sunshine, who had insisted on raising Audrey in a Brooklyn apartment filled with the sounds of her homeland. She refused to let Audrey speak English inside her home. "You are in America, Audrey, but your blood is in Sicily," she would say, tapping Audrey's chest. Because of her, Audrey didn't just speak Italian. She spoke the heavy, lyrical, ancient dialects of the southern islands. She never thought that specific skill would put a target on her back. It was a Tuesday night in late October when the atmosphere in the restaurant shifted from elegantly subdued to palpably terrified. The manager, Richard Harding, a usually composed man who prided himself on his unflappable demeanor, came sprinting through the swinging kitchen doors. His face was entirely devoid of color, sweat beading along his hairline. "Clear the back section," Richard hissed, clapping his hands frantically at the busboys. "Table 12, 14, and 15. Now, move the senator's party to the front window. Give them free champagne, I don't care. Just clear the back." "Richard, what's going on?" asked Sarah, a fellow waitress who was balancing a tray of espresso cups. "The Morettis are pulling up," he breathed, the name carrying a heavy, terrifying weight. Even Audrey, someone who actively avoided the news and minded her own business, knew who the Morettis were. The Moretti crime family had controlled the ports, the unions, and God knew what else for 3 generations. But their current head, Lorenzo Moretti, had modernized the empire. He was 32, notoriously private, ruthlessly efficient, and entirely unforgiving. He was a phantom who rarely made public appearances, preferring to pull the strings from the shadows of his high-rise offices. And he was bringing his mother. 3 black Cadillac Escalades parked illegally in front of the restaurant, their tires resting casually on the curb. The heavy front doors opened, and the temperature in the room seemed to drop by 10 degrees. 4 men in immaculate, dark suits entered first, scanning the room with cold, professional eyes. Then came Caterina Moretti. She was a woman in her late 60s, draped in black cashmere and pearls, her silver hair pulled back into a severe chignon. Her face was sharp, aristocratic, and deeply etched with the kind of perpetual dissatisfaction that only absolute power can buy. Behind her walked Lorenzo. The breath caught in Audrey's throat. The rumors didn't do him justice. Lorenzo Moretti was terrifyingly handsome, standing at 6'3" with shoulders broad enough to eclipse the entryway. He wore a bespoke charcoal suit that moved seamlessly with his predatory, silent stride. His jaw was square, dusted with a faint shadow of a beard, but it was his eyes that paralyzed onlookers, dark, flat, and endlessly calculating. He looked like a man who evaluated the exact cost of destroying everything in his path. They were seated in the secluded back section. Richard had forced Sarah, the most senior waitress, to take the table. Audrey watched from the polishing station as Sarah approached, her hands visibly shaking. It didn't take long for the disaster to unfold. Within 10 minutes, Sarah was in tears. Caterina Moretti was a notoriously impossible woman to please, but tonight she was in a remarkably foul mood. She had rejected the wine, called the olive oil industrial sludge, and was currently tearing into Sarah over the menu. "You call this authentic?" Caterina snapped, her voice carrying a thick, biting accent. "Veal Parmigiana? This is American tourist slop. I ask you for something off the menu, something from home, and you stare at me like a dying fish." I can ask the chef, ma'am," Sarah stammered, tears spilling over her mascara. "If you could just tell me what you'd like in English." "In English?" Caterina slammed her perfectly manicured hand on the table, the silverware clattering. She switched instantly from accented English to rapid, aggressive Sicilian. She began berating Sarah's ignorance, the disrespect of the restaurant, and the utter disappointment of American dining. She was using regional slang, harsh and fiery, completely incomprehensible to anyone who hadn't grown up in the shadow of Mount Etna. Sarah sobbed quietly, stepping back, completely overwhelmed. Richard was frozen by the hostess stand, too afraid to intervene. Lorenzo simply sat back in his leather chair, swirling a glass of sparkling water, his dark eyes watching the spectacle with a terrifying, detached calm. He didn't stop his mother. He let her reign. Audrey couldn't take it anymore. She set down the wine glass she was polishing, grabbed a fresh notepad, and walked straight into the lion's den. "Go back to the kitchen, Sarah," Audrey murmured, as she reached the table, gently touching the older woman's shoulder. Sarah didn't need to be told twice. She practically fled. Audrey turned her attention to the table, keeping her posture straight and her hands folded neatly in front of her. Caterina stopped her tirade, her dark eyes narrowing at Audrey like a hawk assessing a new mouse. "And who are you?" Caterina demanded in English, her tone dripping with venom. "Another idiot child sent to apologize?" Lorenzo's gaze shifted to Audrey. The weight of his stare was physical, like the sudden pressure of deep water. Audrey's heart hammered wildly against her ribs, but she thought of her grandmother Beatrice. She thought of the pride she had in their heritage. Audrey didn't answer Caterina in English. She didn't even use standard, polite Italian. She dug deep into the roots of the language her grandmother had drilled into her, switching to the exact, hyper-specific dialect of Palermo that Caterina had just been yelling in. "There is no need for apologies, Signora Moretti," Audrey said, her voice steady, the heavy consonants and lyrical vowels rolling off her tongue flawlessly. "The girl is young and doesn't know the old ways. But you are hungry for something real, and I will not let you be insulted by a menu printed for tourists. Tell me what your heart wants, and I will make the chef understand." Silence crashed over the table. Caterina's lips parted, her eyes widening in absolute shock. The severe lines of her face softened, falling away to reveal genuine astonishment. Beside her, Lorenzo went completely still. The rhythmic swirling of his glass stopped. He sat up slowly, leaning forward and resting his forearms on the table, his dark eyes locking onto Audrey's with a sudden, burning intensity. "You," Caterina whispered, still in dialect. "You speak like the women in my village. You have the accent of the old country. Who are your people?" "My grandmother was Beatrice Lombardi, from the streets of Capo in Palermo," Audrey answered smoothly, maintaining eye contact. "She taught me that food is respect. So, Signora, if you permit me, I will have the chef prepare a true caponata, followed by pasta alla norma, made not with this American mozzarella, but with the salted ricotta we keep hidden in the back for the owner. Exactly how it should be. Katerina let out a sudden, bark-like laugh that echoed through the quiet restaurant. It was a joyous, triumphant sound. She reached out, her diamond-ringed hand clasping Audrey's wrist with surprising strength. A Lombardi! Of course. Finally some respect in this God-forsaken city. Katerina beamed, turning to her son. Lorenzo, do you hear her? She speaks better than you do. Lorenzo didn't look at his mother. His eyes, dark as polished obsidian, remained fixed on Audrey's face. The detached coldness was gone, replaced by a sharp, predatory intrigue. He was dissecting her, taking apart her plain black uniform, her messy bun, and the defiant tilt of her chin. I hear her, Ma, Lorenzo said. His voice was a deep, gravelly baritone that sent an involuntary shiver down Audrey's spine. He spoke standard Italian, elegant and dangerous. She is full of surprises. For the rest of the evening, Audrey was the only server allowed near table 12. Richard watched from a distance, pale and trembling, while Katerina treated Audrey like a long-lost niece. She told her stories of her youth, complained about the cold winters of New York, and praised the food Audrey brought her. Through it all, Lorenzo barely spoke. He ate quietly, but every time Audrey approached the table to pour wine or clear a plate, she found his eyes on her. There was a strange, heavy electricity buzzing between them. It wasn't just physical attraction. It was the intense scrutiny of a man who was not used to anomalies in his carefully controlled world. Audrey was an anomaly. When the meal finally ended, Katerina stood up, kissing Audrey on both cheeks, a gesture that made the 4 bodyguards by the door visibly stiffen in shock. You are a good girl, Audrey, Katerina said, squeezing her hand. I will tell the owner he owes his life to you tonight. As Katerina walked toward the exit with her guards, Lorenzo lingered behind to settle the bill. He didn't hand the Black American Express card to Richard. He held it out to Audrey. She stepped forward to take it, but as her fingers pinched the plastic, he didn't let go. Audrey looked up, caught in the gravity of his stare. They were standing mere inches apart. Up close, he smelled of cedarwood, expensive tobacco, and pure, concentrated power. He leaned down, his mouth hovering just beside her ear. The heat of his breath made her pulse leap into her throat. You saved your manager's life tonight, Lorenzo murmured, his voice a low, rough whisper meant only for her. But you just stole my heart. He released the card, turned on his heel, and walked out of the restaurant, leaving Audrey frozen, clutching the plastic like it was a live grenade. The next 48 hours were a blur of anxious paranoia. Audrey kept expecting to be fired, or worse, to find a horse's head in her bed like something out of a cheap movie. But nothing happened. Richard gave her a massive bonus out of the register and told her to take the weekend off. She thought the storm had passed. She thought Lorenzo Moretti was just a terrifying, magnetic ghost who had vanished back into the shadows. She was wrong. He wasn't a ghost. He was a spider. And she had just walked right into his web. It was Thursday afternoon. Audrey had just finished buying groceries at a small bodega in her Brooklyn neighborhood. The autumn wind was biting, tearing through her thin coat. As she turned the corner onto her street, she stopped dead in her tracks. Parked in front of her crumbling apartment building was a sleek, black Cadillac Escalade, the exact same one from the restaurant. Leaning against the hood, smoking a cigarette, was a man in a sharp grey suit. He had slicked back dark hair and a jagged scar cutting through his left eyebrow. This was Matteo, Lorenzo's right-hand man and rumoured enforcer. Audrey turned to walk the other way, her heart hammering. But Matteo crushed the cigarette beneath his leather shoe and called out, Miss Bennet, Audrey, please don't run. I really hate running in these shoes. Audrey stopped, gripping her grocery bags tightly. What do you want? She asked, trying to keep her voice steady. Matteo offered a polite, surprisingly gentle smile. My boss would like to have a word with you. If you would please get in the car. And if I say no? Matteo's smile didn't waver, but his eyes grew cold. Lorenzo Moretti is not a man who hears the word no, Miss Bennet. It's just a conversation. You have my word. You will be brought back here safely. Audrey knew the reality of the situation. Running from the Morettis was a death sentence. Getting in the car was a gamble. Taking a deep breath, she walked toward the Escalade. Matteo opened the rear door for her. They drove in total silence. They didn't head toward Manhattan. Instead, they drove deep into Staten Island, eventually passing through a set of massive, wrought-iron security gates. The Moretti estate was a sprawling, fortress-like mansion, surrounded by high stone walls and dense woods. It looked beautiful, cold, and entirely impenetrable. Audrey was escorted into the house, her cheap sneakers sinking into priceless Persian rugs, until Matteo opened a pair of heavy mahogany doors. The boss is waiting, he said, stepping aside. Audrey walked into a massive study lined with floor-to-ceiling bookshelves. A fire cracked lazily in a marble fireplace. Standing by a large window, pouring amber liquid into a crystal glass, was Lorenzo. Without his suit jacket, wearing a fitted black button-down with the sleeves rolled up, he looked less like a corporate CIO and more like the dangerous street soldier he had been born to be. Audrey, he said smoothly, turning around. He held out a glass to her. Drink? I don't drink with strangers, Audrey said, lifting her chin. Why am I here, Mr. Moretti? Lorenzo smirked, a slow, devastatingly handsome expression that made her breath hitch. He set the glass down and walked toward her, moving with the lethal grace of a panther. He stopped just a foot away, forcing her to look up into his dark, assessing eyes. You aren't a stranger to my mother, Lorenzo said, his voice a low rumble. She hasn't stopped talking about the little waitress with the tongue of a Palermo street brawler. She likes you. My mother does not like anyone. I'm glad she enjoyed her pasta, Audrey said tightly. Can I go home now? No, Lorenzo said simply. He stepped back, resting his hip against his massive oak desk, crossing his arms over his chest. I brought you here to offer you a job, a highly paid one. Audrey frowned, confusion cutting through her fear. A job? Doing what? I'm a waitress. For the next month, my family will be hosting Don Alibrandi, Lorenzo explained, his tone shifting into something strictly business, though his eyes never left hers. He is an old-world boss flying in from Sicily to negotiate a massive shipping contract with my family. Alibrandi is old-fashioned. He refuses to speak English. He expects traditional hospitality, respect, and constant attendance. Hire an interpreter, Audrey shot back. I don't need a corporate interpreter who learned Italian from a textbook, Lorenzo countered, his voice hardening. I need someone who understands the nuances, the slang, the cultural weight behind a sigh or a pause. Alibrandi is bringing his wife. My mother needs a companion to entertain her, someone who speaks her dialect perfectly. That is your public role. Public role, Audrey repeated, her stomach dropping. What's my private role? Lorenzo's eyes flashed with dark approval. You're smart, I like that. He pushed off the desk, stalking back into her personal space. The scent of cedar and danger surrounded her again. My family is bleeding from the inside, Audrey. There is a leak. Someone in my inner circle is trying to sabotage this deal with Alibrandi to start a war. I cannot trust my own men to translate the side conversations, the whispers in the hallways. He reached out, his warm, calloused fingers gently brushing a stray lock of hair behind her ear. The touch sent a jolt of electricity straight to her core. I need an outsider. I need someone entirely disconnected from this life, someone who blends in perfectly with the women, fetching tea and making conversation, while listening to every single word the Alibrandi men say to my capos. Lorenzo leaned in closer, his voice dropping to an intimate murmur. I need a spy, Audrey, and I am willing to pay you $100,000 for 4 weeks of your time. Audrey's jaw dropped. $100,000. It would pay off Beatrice's debt instantly. It would buy her a new life. I don't know anything about the Mafia, she whispered, her voice trembling. If they catch me listening— They won't, Lorenzo stated with absolute, terrifying conviction. His hand slid from her hair down to her jaw, his thumb softly tracing her cheekbone. Because you will be by my side, and no one touches what belongs to me. He was offering her salvation, but the price was her soul. Looking into Lorenzo Moretti's eyes, Audrey realized the trap had already snapped shut. She wasn't just working for the devil. She was rapidly falling for him. Audrey moved into the Moretti estate on a Sunday. Her transition from a cramped, drafty Brooklyn apartment to a sprawling fortress on Staten Island felt like stepping onto another planet. Lorenzo's staff had prepared a guest suite for her in the East Wing, situated right next to Katerina's rooms. It was larger than her entire apartment, draped in heavy silk curtains, with a marble bathroom and a walk-in closet that had already been filled with clothes. Katerina herself had overseen the wardrobe. She knocked on Audrey's door that first morning, trailing 2 terrified-looking tailors behind her. A companion to the Moretti matriarch does not wear polyester, Audrey, Katerina had declared, flicking her hand at Audrey's worn jeans. Over the next 3 days, she transformed her. Audrey was outfitted in understated but breathtakingly expensive pieces, cashmere sweaters in muted earth tones, tailored wool trousers, and elegant silk blouses that buttoned to the collarbone. She looked like old money. She looked like she belonged. But beneath the fine fabrics, her stomach was tied in permanent, agonizing knots. She wasn't here to play dress-up. She was a wiretap, wrapped in designer clothing. Lorenzo kept his distance during her preparation, though his presence was everywhere. Audrey saw him from the grand staircase, speaking in hushed, urgent tones with Matteo and his other lieutenants. She watched him pace the manicured gardens, a phone pressed to his ear, exuding a coiled, violent energy. Every time their eyes met across a room or a hallway, the air between them seemed to combust. He would offer a slow, almost imperceptible nod, a silent reminder of their deadly arrangement. On Thursday evening, Don Salvatore Alibrandi arrived. The security around the estate had been quadrupled. Heavily armed men patrolled the perimeter with dogs, and the wrought-iron gates were sealed the moment the Alibrandi motorcade, 5 armored black SUVs, rolled up the circular driveway. Audrey stood in the grand foyer, slightly behind and to the left of Katerina, her hands folded neatly in front of her. Lorenzo stood at the forefront, looking like a sovereign king ready to face a rival empire. The heavy oak doors opened, letting in a gust of crisp autumn air. Don Salvatore Alibrandi was a short, barrel-chested man in his 70s, leaning heavily on a silver-tipped cane. His face was weathered, mapped with deep lines of cruelty and time. Beside him was his wife, Isabella, a quiet woman draped in furs, and his nephew Stefano, a slick, sharp-eyed man in his early 30s, who moved with the arrogant swagger of a prince who had never been told no. Lorenzo stepped forward, opening his arms. Don Salvatore, welcome to my home. He spoke in flawless, formal Italian. Salvatore didn't smile, He grasped Lorenzo's shoulders, kissing him on both cheeks. "Lorenzo, you have grown into your father's shoes. Let us hope they do not pinch." The veiled insult hung in the air, thick and suffocating. Lorenzo didn't blink. He gestured to his mother. Salvatore offered his respects to Caterina, and then his sharp, rheumy eyes landed on Audrey. "And who is this?" Salvatore rasped. "You keep young, pretty birds in the house, Caterina?" Caterina sniffed dismissively. "She is my companion, Audrey, a good Sicilian girl, not like the plastic dolls running around this city." Audrey stepped forward, bowing her head slightly, and spoke in the thick, rolling dialect of Palermo that she had used at the restaurant. "Welcome to the Moretti home, Don Salvatore. It is an honor to have the lions of Sicily under this roof. Donna Isabella, I have ensured your rooms face the morning sun, just as it is in Palermo." Salvatore's bushy eyebrows shot up. Isabella let out a soft gasp of delight, her rigid posture relaxing instantly. "She speaks beautifully," Isabella murmured, reaching out to pat Audrey's cheek. "Like a song from home." Stefano, however, looked at Audrey differently. His eyes dragged up and down her body, stripping away the expensive cashmere to leave her feeling entirely exposed. He smiled, a greasy, predatory smirk. Very beautiful indeed. From the corner of her eye, Audrey saw Lorenzo's jaw clench, a muscle feathered at his temple. He shifted his weight, subtly placing his massive frame between Stefano and Audrey. "My staff will show you to your quarters," Lorenzo said, his voice dropping an octave, cold and absolute. "Rest. Tonight we feast. Tomorrow we talk business." As the Alibrandi entourage was led upstairs, Lorenzo turned to Audrey. The foyer was empty now, save for the two of them and Matteo guarding the front doors. Lorenzo closed the distance between them in 3 long strides. He reached out, his knuckles brushing against the silk of her blouse near her collarbone. "You played that perfectly," he murmured, his dark eyes burning into hers. "But stay away from Stefano. He has a reputation with women. If he looks at you like that again, diplomacy be damned, I will tear his eyes out." Audrey's breath hitched. "I can handle a man looking at me, Lorenzo." "You are under my protection, Audrey," he whispered fiercely, leaning in until the scent of cedar and expensive tobacco enveloped her. "No one disrespects what is mine in my own house." The possessiveness in his words sent a thrill of terror and desire straight down her spine. Audrey was playing a dangerous game, and the lines between her fake role and her real feelings were blurring far too quickly. The welcoming dinner was an exercise in extreme psychological warfare, disguised as a lavish banquet. The dining room was illuminated by hundreds of candles, casting dancing shadows over the crystal glasses and heavy silver platters of roasted lamb and seafood. Audrey played her part flawlessly. She sat slightly behind Caterina and Isabella, ensuring their wine glasses were never empty, laughing softly at their jokes and engaging them in rapid, melodic Sicilian chatter. To the men at the long table, she was entirely invisible, a piece of the furniture, a harmless servant girl who was only there to fetch and carry. That was exactly what Lorenzo wanted. While the women talked about the old country, Audrey's ears were desperately tuned to the head of the table. Lorenzo sat at one end, Don Salvatore at the other. Flanking Lorenzo were his most trusted men, Matteo and his uncle, Vincent Moretti, a silver-haired capo who controlled the shipping ports in Brooklyn. Flanking Salvatore was Stefano, who kept shooting Audrey hungry, unsettling glances over his wine glass. The conversation between the men was guarded. They spoke of unions, of port authorities, and of a massive shipment of untraceable weapons arriving from Eastern Europe on Friday night. The tension was palpable. Salvatore wanted a larger cut of the New York distribution. Lorenzo was refusing to yield his territory. "We are bleeding money to the feds, Lorenzo," Uncle Vincent argued, taking a sip of his Barolo. "Salvatore brings protection from the mainland. We should accommodate him." Lorenzo's eyes flicked to his uncle, dark and unreadable. "My father built this port. I will not hand over the keys because we are afraid of a few federal agents, Vincent." As the dinner concluded, the men retreated to the library for cigars and grappa. The women retired to the drawing room. This was Audrey's moment. "Audrey, mia cara," Caterina said, waving her hand. "Go tell the kitchen to prepare the espresso tray for the men. Bring it to the library yourself. These American maids don't know how to serve without interrupting." "Yes, signora," Audrey replied, bowing her head. Her heart hammered against her ribs like a trapped bird as she walked down the long, dimly lit hallway toward the library. She carried a heavy silver tray laden with espresso cups, sugar cubes, and a bottle of sambuca. The heavy mahogany doors of the library were slightly ajar, letting out plumes of thick cigar smoke and the low rumble of men's voices. As she approached, the main doors closed sharply. Audrey froze. She could hear heavy footsteps moving away from the main library and into the adjoining conservatory, a glass-walled room filled with exotic plants that connected to the outdoor patio. She set the heavy silver tray down on a side table in the hall, her hands shaking. She slipped into the shadows, creeping along the wall until she reached the cracked side door of the conservatory. The room was dark, illuminated only by the moonlight filtering through the glass ceiling. Two figures stood by the rare orchids, speaking in hushed, urgent tones. They were speaking the thickest, most convoluted Palermitan slang Audrey had ever heard. It was designed to be a code, completely unintelligible to an outsider or an American-born Italian. But Audrey wasn't an outsider. She was Beatrice Lombardi's granddaughter. "The boy is too stubborn," a voice hissed. Audrey recognized it instantly. It was Stefano Alibrandi. "He disrespects my uncle. He won't give up the ports." "He doesn't have a choice," a second voice replied. Audrey's blood ran cold. It was Uncle Vincent, Lorenzo's own flesh and blood. On Friday night, at Pier 42, when the shipment arrives, Lorenzo insists on inspecting it himself. He always does. "You have pulled his security back?" Stefano asked. "Matteo will be delayed across town. It will just be Lorenzo and 4 guards," Vincent confirmed, his voice devoid of any familial love. "Your men take him out. It has to look like a rival gang hit. Once Lorenzo is gone, I step up as the head of the Moretti family. I sign the port contracts over to your uncle. We all get rich, and the boy's arrogance is buried with him." Audrey pressed her hand over her mouth to stifle a gasp. A coup, an assassination plot orchestrated by his own uncle. She had to get out. She had to tell Lorenzo. She took a step backward, but her heel caught the edge of a heavy ceramic planter. It scraped against the stone floor with a loud, grating scrut. Silence fell in the conservatory. "Who's there?" Stefano barked, the sound of a gun being drawn echoing in the quiet night. Heavy footsteps began rushing toward the door Audrey was hiding behind. Panic seized her throat. She spun around to run down the hallway, but before she could take 2 steps, a massive hand clamped over her mouth, and an arm wrapped tightly around her waist, lifting her completely off the ground. She thrashed wildly, terrified she had been caught by one of Vincent's men. But a familiar, intoxicating scent of cedarwood and smoke washed over her. Lorenzo pulled her backward into a dark, narrow alcove beneath the grand staircase, just as the conservatory door swung open violently. Lorenzo pressed her back flat against the stone wall, his large body covering hers completely, shielding her in the absolute darkness. His hand remained firmly over her mouth. Stefano stepped out into the hallway, a suppressed pistol gleaming in his hand. He looked left, then right. He was standing less than 5 feet from their hiding spot. If he took one step closer and looked into the alcove, they were both dead. Her heart was beating so violently, Audrey was sure Stefano could hear it. She squeezed her eyes shut, tears of pure terror leaking from the corners. Lorenzo pressed his chest flush against hers, pinning her tight. She could feel the hard, heavily muscled planes of his body, the steady, calm rhythm of his own heart, and the cold steel of the gun he had drawn and pressed against his side, aimed directly at the space Stefano occupied. "Nothing," Stefano muttered in Italian, lowering his gun. "Must have been the wind, or one of those stupid dogs." "Get back in here," Vincent hissed from the shadows. "We can't be seen together." The door closed with a soft click. For a long moment, neither Lorenzo nor Audrey moved. They remained tangled together in the dark. Slowly, Lorenzo lowered his hand from her mouth, but he didn't step back. He kept his body pressed against hers, his face hovering mere inches from her own. In the pitch black, his breath was hot against her lips. "What did you hear, Audrey?" he whispered, his voice a dangerous velvet rumble. The proximity was intoxicating. The fear of death had suddenly mutated into an overwhelming electric surge of adrenaline and desire. "It's Vincent," Audrey breathed back, her hands instinctively coming up to grip the lapels of his suit jacket to keep her knees from giving out. "Your uncle. He's working with Stefano. They're going to ambush you on Friday at Pier 42. He's pulling your security. He wants to kill you and take the family." Lorenzo went entirely still. The betrayal of his own blood hung heavily between them, but his face gave away nothing. Instead, his gaze dropped to her lips, and his hands slid down to grip her waist, pulling her impossibly closer. "You risked your life just now," Lorenzo murmured, his thumb brushing over her hip bone, sending a jolt of fire through her veins. "For me." Audrey swallowed hard, lost in the dark depths of his eyes. "I'm doing my job." "This isn't just a job anymore, Audrey," Lorenzo said softly. He leaned in, his lips brushing the shell of her ear, his voice rough with a sudden, overwhelming hunger. "And Friday night is going to be a bloodbath." Lorenzo didn't let her go. After the footsteps of his treacherous uncle and Stefano faded into the cavernous halls of the estate, he grabbed her hand, his grip unyielding, and pulled her through a hidden servants' corridor. They didn't stop until they reached his private office in the West Wing, a room fortified with bulletproof glass and heavy steel doors that locked with a resonant, final thud. He released her hand and paced the length of the room, running a hand through his dark hair. The cool, calculating Mafia boss was gone, replaced by a man radiating pure, concentrated violence. "Vincent!" Lorenzo snarled, the name tearing from his throat like a curse. He swept a crystal decanter off his desk. It shattered against the stone fireplace, sending amber liquid and shards of glass flying across the rug. "My father's brother, the man who taught me how to shoot. He wants to hand my city over to a feral dog like Stefano for a percentage." Audrey stood trembling by the door, wrapping her arms around herself to ward off the sudden chill. "Lorenzo, they have the entire port security compromised. They said Matteo would be delayed. It's a slaughter. You can't go to Pier 42 on Friday." Lorenzo stopped pacing. He turned to her, his chest heaving, his dark eyes locking onto her frightened face. Slowly, the murderous rage in his expression melted into something far more dangerous. Absolute, predatory resolve. "I'm going to Pier 42, Audrey," he said softly, walking toward her until he was close enough that she had to tilt her head back to meet his gaze. "In my world, if you run from a knife in the dark, They just stab you in the back. You have to turn around and catch the blade. But it's a trap, Audrey whispered, her voice breaking. It was a trap, Lorenzo corrected, reaching out to gently cup her jaw. His thumb traced the trembling line of her lower lip. Now, it's an execution. Thanks to you. The gratitude in his eyes was blinding. He looked at her not as a waitress, not as a spy, but as an equal. The air between them grew heavy, thick with the adrenaline of the night and the undeniable magnetic pull that had been building since the moment she spoke to his mother in Osteria di Savoia. You saved my life tonight, Audrey, Lorenzo murmured, his voice dropping to a rough, intimate register. And I don't share what is mine. Before Audrey could breathe, before she could think, Lorenzo's mouth crashed down on hers. It wasn't a gentle kiss. It was fierce, demanding, and born of the chaotic violence surrounding them. She gasped, her hands instantly flying up to grip the lapels of his suit, pulling him closer as he backed her against the heavy steel door. His hands tangled in her hair, his lips tasting of expensive scotch and raw, unbridled power. She kissed him back with equal desperation, entirely consumed by the intoxicating fire of Lorenzo Moretti. When they finally broke apart, both of them were breathless. He rested his forehead against hers, his dark eyes burning into her soul. On Friday, you stay by my mother's side, he ordered softly. Do not leave the East Wing. When the sun comes up on Saturday, the rats will be dead, and this city will be entirely mine. And so will you. The next 48 hours were agonizing. The estate was a powder keg, masquerading as a luxury resort. Audrey continued her charade, pouring tea for Caterina and Isabella, listening to their stories and smiling while her stomach twisted into tight, painful knots. She watched Uncle Vincent kiss Caterina's cheek at breakfast, playing the devoted family man while secretly plotting her son's murder. She watched Stefano stalk the hallways with arrogant confidence. Friday night arrived with a bitter, howling wind that rattled the ancient windows of the estate. Lorenzo left at 10 o'clock. He kissed his mother's cheek, shot Audrey a single piercing look of reassurance, and walked out the front doors with 4 guards. According to the plan she overheard, Matteo had been sent to Brooklyn to handle a sudden union dispute, a diversion set up by Vincent. At midnight, Caterina retired to her chambers. Audrey sat in her room, staring at the clock, her heart pounding a frantic rhythm against her ribs. Then, her bedroom door clicked open. She spun around, expecting a maid. Instead, Stefano Alibrandi stepped into her room, closing the door quietly behind him. He wasn't dressed for sleep. He wore a dark leather jacket, and in his right hand he held a suppressed automatic pistol. "Hello, little bird." Stefano smiled, his eyes gleaming with malicious delight. He spoke in the heavy Palermitan dialect. "Did you really think I didn't smell your cheap perfume in the conservatory the other night?" Audrey's blood turned to ice. "I don't know what you're talking about." "Please," Stefano sneered, taking a step closer, raising the barrel of the gun to point directly at her chest. "Vincent's men saw you running back to the East Wing. Lorenzo thinks he's so clever, keeping his little spy hidden in plain sight. He probably thinks he's walking into an ambush he can control tonight." Stefano chuckled, a dry, evil sound. But Vincent didn't tell his men to shoot Lorenzo on the pier. He told them to blow the entire warehouse to ashes with C4. Lorenzo is already dead. A sob ripped from Audrey's throat. "And now," Stefano whispered, stepping into her space and grabbing her arm with brutal force, "I'm going to take you to the docks. When Salvatore realizes Lorenzo is gone, he will need a reason to justify taking over the territory. A tragic story about how Lorenzo's little whore tried to betray the family will do perfectly. Walk." He jammed the cold muzzle of the gun into her ribs, forcing her out of the room and down the back stairwell. Her mind raced frantically. Lorenzo didn't know about the explosives. He was walking into a slaughterhouse. The drive from the Staten Island estate to Pier 42 was a suffocating nightmare of freezing rain and impenetrable darkness. Stefano Alibrandi had shoved Audrey into the back of a stolen, unmarked sedan, his suppressed Sig Sauer. P226 pressed unforgivingly into her ribs for the entire agonizing journey. They tore up the Brooklyn-Queens Expressway, the tires hydroplaning violently over the slick, pothole-ridden asphalt. The heater in the car was broken, but the violent trembling racking Audrey's body had nothing to do with the biting cold. "Keep your mouth shut, and keep your hands where I can see them," Stefano hissed, his knuckles white on the steering wheel as he merged off the highway and navigated the labyrinth of abandoned industrial roads leading to the water. The heavy metallic scent of the East River, mixed with decaying fish and diesel exhaust, began to seep through the floorboards. "You don't have to do this," Audrey whispered, her voice raw and cracking. "Lorenzo knows you're planning an ambush. He's not stupid. If you kill me, he will hunt you to the ends of the earth." Stefano let out a sharp, grating laugh that echoed in the cramped cabin. "He won't be hunting anyone, little bird. By the time we arrive, your beloved boss will be driving his armored Cadillac straight into 5 pounds of military-grade C4. There won't be enough of Lorenzo Moretti left to fill a shoebox." Tears blurred Audrey's vision, mixing with the flashes of passing streetlights. She thought of Lorenzo's dark, commanding eyes, the rough heat of his hands when he held her in his office, the fierce, unyielding way he had promised to protect her. She was a waitress from Brooklyn who had tripped into a world of wolves, and now the only man who could keep her safe was walking blindly into his own execution. They arrived at Warehouse 7, a colossal, rusted monolith of corrugated iron that sat at the very edge of the pier. The wind was howling off the water, driving the rain sideways. Heavily armed men, mercenaries loyal to Uncle Vincent, wearing tactical vests over dark clothing, patrolled the perimeter. They didn't look like traditional Mafia soldiers. They looked like a paramilitary death squad. Stefano killed the engine, grabbed Audrey by the collar of her coat, and dragged her out into the torrential downpour. She stumbled over the uneven concrete, the rain instantly soaking through to her skin. "Move!" he barked, shoving the gun barrel hard against her spine. He forced her through a heavy, reinforced steel side door. The interior of the warehouse was cavernous, drafty, and smelled overwhelmingly of old timber and ozone. A single cluster of harsh industrial halogen lights illuminated the center of the massive space, casting long, distorted shadows against the peeling walls. Standing perfectly still in the center of that light, examining the face of a gold Patek Philippe pocket watch, was Uncle Vincent. He wore a pristine, camel hair topcoat over a bespoke suit, looking entirely absurd amidst the grime and rust of the docks. "Ah, the little songbird," Vincent said smoothly in English as Stefano shoved Audrey forward. She collapsed to her knees on the freezing, oil-stained concrete, gasping for breath. Vincent snapped his watch shut and slipped it into his vest. A loose end tied up. "Is it done, Stefano? Are the charges set?" "Wired to the main roll-up doors, just like you asked," Stefano replied, wiping the rain from his face with the back of his hand. "The detonator is hot. The second his headlights hit the ramp, we blow it. I brought the girl so we have a body to point to when my uncle asks why the peace treaty was broken. We say she was a mole for a rival family," Lorenzo found out, "and she blew the warehouse in a suicide play." "Perfect," Vincent murmured, looking down at Audrey with cold, dead eyes. "A tragic tale of a boss who trusted the wrong woman." "You're a monster," Audrey spat, glaring up at him through a curtain of wet hair. "He is your blood, He's your family." Vincent's lip curled into a sneer of profound disgust. "Blood is a liquid, Audrey. Territory is solid. My father helped build the Commission of the 5 Families. We bled in the streets of this city to take the ports. And what does Lorenzo do? He runs this syndicate like a Wall Street hedge fund. He refuses to deal in the heavy narcotics that the Alibrandis offer. He plays nice with the politicians. He's weak. Tonight the old ways return. And you, unfortunately, are just a necessary casualty of business." Suddenly the crackle of a 2-way radio on Vincent's belt broke the heavy silence. "Boss, headlights approaching the main gate. It's the black Escalade. It's Moretti." Vincent smiled, a terrifying, greedy stretching of his lips. He pulled a small black detonator from his coat pocket. "And right on time. Say goodbye to your king, little bird." He pressed his thumb down on the red button. Audrey squeezed her eyes shut, bracing for the concussive roar of the explosion, bracing for the end of the only man she had ever truly loved. But the warehouse remained completely silent. There was no fire, no deafening boom, only the steady drumming of the rain against the metal roof. Vincent frowned, mashing the button 3 more times. "What the hell? The signal is dead. Boss!" The radio crackled again, but this time the voice was completely panicked. "The Escalade is empty. Someone put a brick on the gas pedal. It's a decoy." The transmission was cut short by the sharp, echoing crack of a high-caliber sniper rifle firing from outside. Before Vincent or Stefano could even raise their weapons, the entire back wall of the warehouse, the massive reinforced steel loading doors that faced the water, blew inward with a cataclysmic shriek of tearing metal. An armored, matte black tactical SUV tore through the debris, its high-beam headlights blindingly bright, spinning wildly on the wet concrete before slamming to a halt 30 feet away from them. Chaos erupted instantly. From the rusted catwalks high above them, the rhythmic, suppressed thwip-thwip-thwip of automatic fire rained down. Vincent's rogue mercenaries dropped like stones, their tactical vests useless against armor-piercing rounds, fired with deadly precision from the shadows. The doors of the SUV flew open. Matteo stepped out from the driver's side, moving with terrifying, practiced lethality. He raised a customized assault rifle to his shoulder and systematically neutralized the remaining 2 guards at the side exit. He hadn't been delayed in Brooklyn. The entire narrative had been a counter-ruse designed to flush Vincent out. And then, stepping from the back seat of the SUV, was Lorenzo. He didn't look like a CEO tonight. Dressed in a black tactical turtleneck and dark combat trousers, a suppressed handgun gripped loosely in his right hand, he looked like the Reaper. His face was a mask of absolute, chilling calm. His dark eyes swept the carnage, assessing the bodies on the floor, until they locked onto Audrey kneeling in the dirt, and then shifted to Stefano. "Lorenzo!" Vincent screamed, his aristocratic facade shattering entirely. He dropped the useless detonator, throwing his hands in the air, backing away until his shoulders hit a steel support beam. "Wait, it was Stefano. He manipulated me. The Alibrandis forced me into this, I swear to God." Lorenzo didn't even acknowledge his uncle's pathetic existence. He kept his steady, predatory gaze fixed entirely on Stefano. "Let her go, Stefano," Lorenzo said. His voice wasn't a shout. It was a low, resonant command that carried over the sound of the rain, vibrating with a lethal promise. Stefano, realizing his entire empire had just collapsed in a matter of seconds, descended into absolute panic. He lunged forward, grabbing a fistful of Audrey's wet hair and hauling her violently to her feet. She cried out as the cold steel of his pistol was jammed viciously against her temple. He dragged her backward, using her body as a human shield. "Stay back!" Stefano screamed in rapid, panicked Sicilian, his chest heaving. "Drop the gun, Moretti. Drop it right now, or I swear to Christ I will paint this floor with her brains. Tell your men to stand down." Tears streamed down Audrey's cheeks, mixing with the rain. The pain in her scalp was blinding, but she forced her eyes open, looking directly at Lorenzo. She didn't want her last sight to be the floor. She wanted it to be him. "You came to my city," Lorenzo replied in the same flawless, heavy Palermitan dialect. He didn't drop his weapon. Instead, he began to walk forward, his footsteps completely silent on the concrete. His arm was extended, the barrel of his gun aimed steadily at Stefano's face, tracing his microscopic movements. "You ate my food, you slept under my roof, and you put your hands on my woman." "I'll kill her!" Stefano shrieked, his finger tightening on the trigger, the gun shaking against Audrey's skull. "No," Lorenzo said softly, stopping exactly 10 feet away. "You won't." Lorenzo didn't blink. He didn't hesitate. He simply squeezed the trigger. The gunshot was deafening in the enclosed space. The agonizing grip on Audrey's hair vanished instantly, replaced by a fine mist of warmth that sprayed the air beside her. Stefano's body went completely rigid, the light instantly extinguished from his eyes before he collapsed straight backward onto the wet concrete. A neat, dark hole was planted perfectly between his eyes. Audrey fell to her knees, gasping for air, shaking violently as the adrenaline left her system in a rush. The cold, ruthless Mafia boss vanished. Within seconds, Lorenzo dropped his weapon and closed the distance between them, sliding to his knees on the filthy floor. His large, warm hands framed Audrey's face, his thumbs frantically wiping away the rain and tears, searching her eyes for any sign of injury. "Audrey," he breathed, his voice finally cracking with raw emotion. He pulled her flush against his chest, wrapping his arms around her with a crushing, desperate strength. He buried his face in her damp hair, breathing heavily. "Are you hurt? Did he hurt you? Tell me." "I'm okay," Audrey sobbed, clutching the dark fabric of his shirt, burying her face in his neck, inhaling the deep, familiar scent of cedarwood, gunpowder, and rain. "I'm okay. You're alive. You're alive." Lorenzo held her impossibly tight, rocking her slightly on the cold floor, kissing the crown of her head over and over again. He looked up over her shoulder at Matteo, the lethal mask sliding back into place. "Take Vincent to the soundproof basement at the estate," Lorenzo ordered, his voice devoid of any familial mercy. "I want him alive until I am finished extracting every name he ever spoke to. Then, call Don Salvatore in Sicily. Tell him his nephew is dead by my hand, and the price for his life just cost them the entire eastern seaboard." "Yes, boss," Matteo nodded, moving forward to drag a sobbing, pleading Vincent toward the waiting tactical vehicles. Lorenzo turned his attention completely back to Audrey. He scooped her up into his arms, lifting her effortlessly from the cold, blood-stained concrete. He carried her toward the warmth of the SUV, shielding her face from the gruesome sight of Stefano's body. "It's over, mia cara," Lorenzo whispered against her ear as he placed her gently in the back seat, his dark eyes burning with an intense, proprietary devotion that terrified and thrilled her all at once. "No one will ever touch you again. I swear it on my life. You are mine now." 2 years later, Osteria di Savoia remains the finest restaurant in Manhattan, but Audrey hasn't carried a tray there since that fateful Tuesday night. Instead, she occasionally dines at the secluded back table. She is no longer Audrey Bennett, the struggling waitress suffocating under debt. She is Audrey Moretti, the donna of New York's most powerful syndicate. Lorenzo kept every promise he made on that blood-soaked pier. He dismantled his enemies, unified the families, and built an empire that bowed to both of them. Caterina adores her, treating her like the daughter she never had, and their home is filled with the warm, melodic sounds of her grandmother's dialect. Lorenzo still looks at her with that same dark, consuming intensity, entirely possessed by the woman who dared to yell back. Audrey walked into the lion's den, expecting to be devoured. But instead, she tamed the beast.